First, before I get into the subject of this video, I would like to say that it did take quite a while to get all the different gameplay footage that I'm going to be using for the background for this video. Did that even make sense, what I just said? What the fuck? That being said, it will be easier going forward talking about one specific game at a time as opposed to an overarching theme that I would like to discuss over multiple games. Some of these games I have already talked about or played in the past on this very channel, and some I want to make a deeper dive into some point in the future. As all of those other YouTubers would love to mispronounce that one French word, without further ado, let's talk about linearity and narrative in video games. Video games have always been designed around some sort of demonstration, mechanic, or story that the developers and people on the storyboards want to tell. Demonstrating their technical capabilities, showing off a complex mechanic or one with an interesting premise that they can weave into their narrative, or telling a story that they want the players to experience. Linearity is one way they are able to guide players into experiencing the story or stories they have prepared for the player. But there are lines that need to be drawn to do just that. If you make a game too linear, it is essentially just a movie that the player is advancing from scene to scene as they play the game, and they actually have very little impact on the game world. One solution developers come up with to tell the same story is to allow the player to do whatever they would like during gameplay. But this runs the risk of something people like to call ludonarrative dissonance, putting the player character or NPCs and companions in awkward positions contrary to their story characters from how the player interacts with and controls them during gameplay. This dissonance can pull the player out of the game or minimize the story impact or even make the player feel a sense of defeat in being unable to make any noticeable impact on the game world. Being able to suspend disbelief and integrate the player into the game world allows for people to engage in a fantasy they are invested in because of how it makes them feel a part of a different world in a meaningful way. This can, oddly enough, be seen in how player characters end up treating NPCs, as silly as that may sound. If a player is driven into a story that minimizes the actions they choose to commit, or overwrites them with a cutscene, then players feel less guilty about acting like absolute brain-dead assholes. If you have no investment in the NPCs and whether they live or die is inconsequential, a player may be tempted to beat the shit out of them because there are no punishments, or change in the story, growth, etc., and sometimes it even rewards the player. Let's say an NPC is critical towards the advancement of the plot or overarching narrative and themes. What if a player tries to kill them? The developers usually will have a workaround for that to prevent causing any issues further into the gameplay, and this also can have a positive or negative impact on the gameplay. Say you give those NPCs infinite HP. This may make the player want to treat them like a punching bag. What if you give them some pass-out mechanic they get back up from after a while? Now the player is essentially being told visually, you can't do that, which can be irritating to some folks. What if you put them out of reach and make it impossible to kill them due to a range limit? It could work, but sometimes it looks silly. Some of the best solutions I've seen to preserve narrative and keep suspension of disbelief is simply making those important characters long-distance communication, cutscene characters only, or making it so that there are no required NPCs to tell the story. The best example of this is from the most recent games I have played, and it is found in the Dark Souls series. You can't really talk about Dark Souls without talking about the first Dark Souls game, which laid the framework for the series. While it is a spiritual successor to King's Quest and Demon's Souls, two games I personally have only watched and not played, Dark Souls established itself as a game that sent the player off to figure out how to navigate the world and figure out what to do without being told explicitly. in a world set out to kill the player. The story tells of four lords and Gwyn, war and death, and a distortion of reality, time, and a necessity to link a flame. To be honest, I'm not versed in Dark Souls lore that much, but I love Dark Souls Remastered, which is awesome as a game. Once the opening cutscene explaining the hopeless and terrifying world you are in ends, a dead body drops into your prison cell with a key on its corpse. This key gets you out of your cell, and you go through a corridor filled with hollows who pay no attention to you as you make it to the ladder to climb to the surface and out to a courtyard with a sword stuck in the ground and the prompt, "Light bonfire." Already, when I first played the game, I was pulled in and eager to overcome the challenges ahead. The game knows it's unfair, and just to solidify this, you open the big doors in front of you and encounter a boss designed to be too strong for a player to fight reasonably. If you die, you spawn at the bonfire you rested at last, and this tells you you will probably die a bunch throughout your journey, but you can keep going anyways, and explains this as a curse of the dark sign to keep coming back, death after death, making you the perfect candidate to save the world. After you gain your equipment, you are strong enough to take on the first boss and leave this tutorial section of the game. Unlike other tutorials, the only thing explained to you is the Estus flask, as all the other button control hints are simply signs left on the floor that you can choose to read or not. In terms of linearity, the Undead Asylum is very straightforward, with no branching paths or real choice involved, but this section of the game sets you up for the rest of the game and tells you generally what to expect, but not what you should do. For this tutorial section alone, Dark Souls 1 has solidified itself as one of the best openings to a game I have ever played by showing instead of just telling. Once you leave the asylum, the world of Lordran is open to you to explore. In terms of linearity, this is what you are supposed to do. Go through the Undead Burg, fight the Taurus demon, unlock the famous shortcut ladder under the Hellkite Bridge to learn about shortcuts, go to the chapel to collect the basement key, meet Andre in the Undead Parish and find the shortcut elevator all the way back to Firelink, fight the gargoyles and ring the first bell of awakening, go to the basement from the bridge and lower Undead Burg to the Capra demon who grants you the key to the depths upon defeating it. Go to the depths, fight the gaping dragon, get the key to Blighttown, traverse down into the bottom of Blighttown, fight Quelaag, ring the second bell of awakening, return to the Undead Parish to go to the now open Sen's Fortress and climb up to the top of the fort to fight the Iron Golem and be flown into Anor Londo, struggle through the rafters and past the snipers into the castle in which the Dragon Slayer Ornstein and Executioner Smo are waiting. Beat them, collect the Lord Vessel from the Illusion of Gwyndolin, and then fight the four lords in their respective regions to offer to the Lord Vessel to open a kiln and beat Gwyn. Here's the thing, the game doesn't care if you go to some of those later areas first. Sometimes you'll run into a locked door that funnels you into a more normal play path progression. But even then, you can start off with the Master Key, which unlocks some of those paths. Want to fight Quelaag first, right after the tutorial? Go for it using the back entrance to Blighttown. Don't like the depths or lower Undead Burg? Skip them. Want to fight Sif in the Darkroot Garden? Want to fight Havel? Want to fight a big-ass butterfly that shoots lasers? Go for it. The game has a story and an intended path, but you don't have to follow it. You can make your own path. The game lets you struggle, and I think that's awesome. You are allowed to make mistakes and still profit from them without ruining the story. Are there still reasonable barriers? Of course, but none that are not believable. You are even allowed to fight one of the final bosses without the Lord Vessel if you can reach them. The Four Kings are able to be beaten as your third boss if you want, and the developers made sure that you were able to and not get stuck. Dark Souls Remastered has its issues, as any game does, But the story is non intrusive and done beautifully while providing a reasonably open world with a natural progression, not to leave it too open ended, as well as being packed with tons of optional content that builds upon the amazingly crafted world. Now, because of this rant of love over the openness of Dark Souls Remastered, you may think I just like open world games. But our next example is not one. Lies of P. Lies of P is a really fun and challenging game whose premise is batshit crazy until you play the game and see just how they accomplished it. Dark Souls, plus Pinocchio, plus zombies. Unlike the last game, this game follows the classic tale with a lot of respect paid to its source material and a spin placed on it to make it into a fantasy combat setting. You play as a puppet with the unique ability to lie, unlike all the other robotic puppets who follow the laws of robotics essentially. After the puppets went crazy, you, a project of Geppetto, wake up and use your abilities to save the world, and along the way end up discovering what it means to be human. Corridor is a term used to describe gameplay in which you go from one objective to the next without a significant branching path, and you may encounter obstacles on the way, but ultimately every player ends up at the end of the corridor. This game uses these corridors, but enemy placement, optional reading materials, well thought out shortcuts, and some maps with intricate branches for additional loot make these corridors still fun and engaging. Unlike Dark Souls 1, Lies of P chooses a more direct narrative and progression for their story. Cutscenes with voice acting, dialogue with characters you meet to progress, and areas connected with each other, mostly at a singular point, usually following a boss to guide you in the right direction. The tutorial section chooses info card pop ups to explain mechanics the game uses, but these can be turned off if you are already familiar. This game is exclusively linear, with endings only based upon certain choices you make along the way. But nonetheless, you have an impact on the world, and fighting the linearity isn't something that the player is really tempted by. And that is ironically or maybe intentionally the point of the game. You don't want to go against what is programmed, but you can choose, just like the puppet you play as. The story is awesome, the gameplay is fun, and you don't feel like you're trapped, but instead feel like you are progressing towards an ultimate goal, which is what makes linear games fun. Similarly, one of my favorite games ever is Metroid Fusion, a game often criticized for being too linear. The game throws you into a sci fi universe as a bounty hunter who follows orders from a space federation. You are almost killed by a parasite that is not well researched and poses an unknown amount of danger to the universe. After you are sent to the research station your infected suit parts were sent to, you are greeted with a very weak version of Samus to play as after a computer tells you to go investigate. The station is dark, empty, and eventually you come to find that the parasite caused the explosion that brought you there to investigate, and it has escaped containment. Throughout the game, the computer tells you what to do after completing each objective it issues to you, explaining that the objective needs to be completed to improve your ability to combat the parasite, save the station, or do damage control. Each objective is a goal you work towards on your quest to exterminate the parasite. How you get to each objective isn't always straightforward and may come with dangerous encounters that put your life at risk and are meant to stress you out. Eventually, while playing, you may think, okay, they're able to have me download weapons to make me stronger and more capable to fight this stupid parasite, so why don't they just gear me the fuck up? Only to find later that they don't want you to exterminate the parasite but study it, even though they don't know how dangerous it is and you have experienced firsthand just how deadly it really is. The story has a massive twist critical to the story that justifies its linearity, and the fun gameplay allows for a satisfying experience as you slowly become more powerful throughout the story and finally escape the ship while exterminating the ex-parasite that was on board. Okay, so now that I have that first unpopular opinion out there, I may as well just keep up that trend by talking shit on a game that is seemingly universally hailed, Dark Souls 3. To clarify, before I get into this part, uh, do I find the gameplay fun? Sure, it has some of my favorite Dark Souls bosses, like the Abyss Watchers or even Gundyr. My issue comes in with the discussion I bring to you in this video with linearity and narrative. The narrative is very similar to Dark Souls 1, with just a dash more dialogue to guide the player better. The game starts with the explanation of a world in ash and the light that you bring to save it. The wording is a bit heavy-handed with embers, but not as much as like hollow and humanity in Dark Souls 1. My issue comes in with the failure to commit to the branching of paths as well as the world's disconnectedness. Take, for example, the boss order. You finish the tutorial and associated boss, then you go to Firelink and warp to the first area of the game. Then you are presented with your first choice between fighting Vort, the intended boss to fight next, or Dancer, but only if you know how to activate this boss early. Dancer is clearly the later game option for boss, and has an insta-kill move that kind of discourages you from trying to fight them. But let's say you beat them first, and could go all the way to the end of that whole ordeal. You still have to go through Vort to get to the undead settlement, which, by the end of your prior journey, you may end up being overpowered for, which removes the challenge from that section of the game. Had the path after Dancer circumvented Vort and allowed you to skip a good portion of Undead Settlement, or that area altogether, while still being connected, then it would be far more interesting and make the game feel more open in a positive way that rewards the player and builds up a very connected world. Let's say that you go through Vort as intended. You traverse a bunch of corridors until eventually you are presented with a really cool branching path: Crystal Sage or Abyss Watchers. Both of these bosses are reasonable to fight at this point in the game and lead to different main areas of the game: the chapel or the catacombs. Fucking hate catacombs in like all of the Dark Souls games, bro. Kind of punishing yourself by just going there. At first, this would sound like a major positive, and while I was playing to get footage for this video, it was. The catacombs are significantly harder than the intended path going through the Crystal Sage, but is still doable. You get to Volnir, a cool but gimmick boss fight that's really easy, and the door ahead reveals the outside world again in a breathtaking area. You cross the bridge with a sense of wonder just to run into an arbitrary invisible wall that requires a quest item. Oh, I forgot how bullshit that was. Now that I have ventured all the way to Irithyll, I get to march my dumbass back to the bonfire or die. Then warp back to the closest bonfire I have to the Crystal Sage, which, damn it, I forgot to get the closer one. So now I gotta find it, then die to Crystal Sage because I got fucking sniped and had no poise, no bitches. Then I go through the area that leads to the chapel, fight through a bunch of traps. I hate enemies that have melee attacks that bleed you, like what the actual fuck. Then fight past some giants once I have made it to the chapel, just to get to a lame-ass boss that is basically another gank fight, but with no real threat other than forgetting the run button or getting bored. And then I get the stupid doll. Hooray! Now I can warp back to the entrance of Irithyll and actually go through the invisible magic wall. Some of you may find this criticism hypocritical since Dark Souls 1 had golden fog gates or required the doll to get into the painted world, but here is the critical difference. The painted world was optional if I didn't want to do it, and the golden gates only stopped you from the specific Lord Soul progression paths separately, excluding the Four Kings, which was intentionally left open. My issue with Dark Souls 3 is that it's trying to be both an open world and a closed world. It cannot be an open world and block off major areas arbitrarily while also making warping a necessity to go between areas. It also cannot be linear without blocking off areas it doesn't want the player to go to yet. Previews of later game areas are nice, but not when you are at the area and running into an invisible wall that says, "You can't go here yet, dumbass." I wanted to like Dark Souls 3 so much. Beautiful game with fun and interesting mechanics, streamlining for issues that were present in the previous games, good UI and UI options, some great bosses, but the linearity that conflicts with the world and the narrative of the Dark Souls series leaves me feeling unsatisfied with the game. Dark Souls 3 is part of the reason I wanted to make this video. I'll watch people play the game, but I just personally don't have much interest in playing it myself. While I'm on the trend of unpopular video game opinions, let's talk about Dark Souls 2. Yeah, I won't lie, I actually kind of love it. I fuck with it. It has problems, don't get me wrong, but I will keep coming back to it because it is so much fun to me. So before you state your opinion in the comments about how much you think it's bullshit and you hate Dark Souls 2, hear me out real quick. Game starts off in The Things Betwixt with a blank slate character, vastly different from Dark Souls 1. And then you make your way to the character creation, in which the question is posed to you, is this your true self? From a gameplay perspective, this is just, is this the character you're okay with playing with? But by phrasing it in the way that they do, they add to the immersion of the old firekeepers asking you who you are, making it a thoughtful question to the player that fits into the game. And you haven't even started playing yet, really. In Dark Souls 2, the tutorial section is straight up just optional, and you can skip past all of it if you want, which is pretty awesome already. It is the one Dark Souls game where you can just do that. You leave the cave out into the beautiful coastal area of Majula, the hub of the game, with a couple shops, a blacksmith, the firekeeper, and other characters along the way you find, similar to how Dark Souls 3 ended up doing it, and even Dark Souls 1 to a lesser extent with characters like Patches. From Majula, you are presented with 3 branches: Hyde's Tower, the Forest of Giants, and the Path to the Shaded Woods. The last one is sadly locked behind a fragrant branch of yore, but nothing stops you from going straight to the tower to fight the Dragon Rider and even the Dragon Slayer. If you progress this path, you can go through No Man's Wharf, the prison area, and then you get to this Bastille. If you go to the Forest of Giants, on the other hand, you can go through a different path to get to this same Bastille, but in a way that is not directly connected to the area, being flown there through a cutscene, as is tradition, as this is a Dark Souls game. When I played through the more challenging path, I thought, this game is unfairly hard. Then I went back to explore around Majula after my friend said, go back. And sure enough, I found the intended route with good early game shit. And that's when I realized the game let me fuck up, which makes me respect it so much more. After I found out the 2 main branching paths meet back up and converge into the Bastille, I was blown away. I had gotten a fragrant branch of yore from the wharf and used it on the pyromancer lady, which unlocked the shaded wood, which was a super fun but challenging area for me. The barriers in that game made sense and they weren't too intrusive, and the amount of choice right off the bat was absolutely amazing to me. It is the most open world of the Dark Souls series I've played. Actually, probably second, but whatever. Were there some unfair moments? Sure. But the game also knows this by having plenty of traps with good rewards and even just using bait to playfully mock your curiosity. Because the game lets you fuck up, you can find yourself playing differently each time as you experiment and try to defy the game to master it. And the narrative is still intact since it doesn't force or press itself, which works for an open world. Yes, this drinking speed is fucking dog shit, but I still love the game and even had some unique online multiplayer moments, like when I summoned Joe Swanson to help me fight the Pursuer in the first encounter, which, by the way, is such a cool area and shortcut and idea in general. Give you one chance to fight the area boss early, and also make the shortcut a wall that gets blown up, revealing the bonfire you were last at. Even with a rush development, the game still manages to make a world that feels connected and cohesive. With this rush development, just talking about this real quick, I remember watching like older builds of Dark Souls 2 in like an exploration video talking about what it originally could have been based on the information that was in the game. And they had some really cool ideas with the gutter and the germ, but unfortunately, they weren't really able to execute it within the time that they had to make the game. But all things considered, the product that we got was still pretty damn good. I know a lot of people may point to the Black Gulch as an example of just an absolute dog shit area that is just horrible through and through. But when I went through the first time, I honestly didn't mind it that much. I may be masochistic, okay? Don't get me wrong. Like, I won't deny that part, but I'm just saying it wasn't that bad. Like, as long as you played through slowly and carefully and you had a couple poison moss to cure yourself or whatever, it wasn't horrible, especially when you find out you can just break the statues that are spitting at you. Something very challenging to accomplish is making a world that is open but leaves you stranded and maintains strong linearity. But a certain group decided to do just that by stranding the player in the game. Raft. Raft is a craft survival game with a very clear linear progression in terms of its story, but an open world in terms of its gathering mechanics. It is essentially a linear game that almost tricks you into believing it is more open than it truly is. With no explanation or tutorial, the game throws you in the deep end, middle of the ocean, on a tiny raft, surrounded by flotsam while holding a hook and rope. Unsure of what to do, you begin grabbing all the shit you can and crafting a bunch of different things. You drift either past or straight into a tiny island, and you can explore, swim around, dive into the water, play with the shark, but eventually you will open a barrel with the schematic for the receiver, and then eventually for the antennae as well. After collecting, experimenting, you eventually find yourself able to craft said device, and then you turn on your receiver just to find out. You put down the antennae wrong, God, and then you turn it on again to see a little blue dot. This little blue dot takes you to the first main quest island, which is filled with goodies and notes to collect. These notes and context clues from the structures themselves begin the world building process and starts the narrative for the game. Knowing how to get to the first main quest island, you can get there in about an hour or something. So by this point, your raft is more established, and now you are working on modifying it, making it better, making survival easier, taking risks, collecting more resources, all while the story develops. The game doesn't hold your hand, and instead the tutorial is replaced with the player's own trial, error, and discovery, making subsequent playthroughs more efficient and rewarding smart decision making. The story is the same each time, and the progression is the same each time from main quest island to main quest island. Also, I'm just going to say MQI from now on if it's in the script. I can't remember if I say it again at any point. Probably, who knows. But how you get to each checkpoint varies drastically as you will encounter different islands, sometimes secret islands. You'll encounter trading posts with useful loot and an exchange shack that provides special gear, furniture, items, recipes, etc. It's kind of a pet peeve of mine when YouTubers are just saying etc. X and et are very different fucking words. Fun fact before I continue though, those like secret islands, you can't actually get to them unless you don't have your receiver and antenna yet. Um, you have to find them just random chance. I think it's like, I don't know, like a 5% chance that when you get like some randomly generated island, it'll be one of those secret ones. There's one with a boat, there's one with a crashed plane, and probably some other ones. I can't remember. They got cool shit on them though. I've encountered all of them so far, I think. It's a linear game that feels more open than it truly is while providing a satisfying challenge that is fun to replay and experiment with. Raft may seem like the type of game that would ironically dry up each time you play it, but thankfully it provides 5 different game modes to choose from that build up to the penultimate challenge of hard mode. Creative mode is as it sounds. You can create anything you want that you are capable of making in the base game, and you don't really need to worry about materials and their cost because you essentially have infinite of all materials while crafting. This is useful if you're ever curious what builds are possible, more efficient, cool as hell, and how many materials are required for certain builds. Peaceful mode is also as it sounds. Normal enemies are non hostile, but this is the easiest version you can play and still go through the game with resources and the survival aspect. Easy mode, there are no penalties for death. You take less damage and survival is still easy. Normal mode, the most appropriate way to play this game, and a nice challenge for a single player. It is the intended difficulty of the game and fun with friends, but the death penalty is that you lose some loot and tool durability. Hard mode. This is not meant to be played alone. The shark that follows is very aggressive. You take a lot of damage. Survival is harder in terms of food and hydration management, and if you die, you cannot respawn and must be carried to a bed. Oh, fun fact, there's a little what is it? Exploit where if you're playing with another person, like this doesn't work with single player fucking obviously, but if you just wait long enough, you can just hit unstuck for your character and you'll just be warped back to your boat. So your friend can kind of just wait for you and then just put you on the bed and then, you can just keep throwing and bashing your head against a wall. I've gotten far in solo hard mode, making it past several MQIs, but unfortunately, one slip up and I died, and it ended the run. I'm pretty sure from what I remember, I died to the fucking bear. I was like 5 hours into a run or something. Because like I was playing it super safe. I was collecting all sorts of materials. I wouldn't even step foot on an island unless I know I was like anchored, geared the fuck up with a ton of food and water. These different modes do help shake up the linear nature of the game after you see past the facade of what appears to be an open world game. Now I've given examples of open world games I like and linear games I like as well as some of the nuance with in-betweens. But what about an open world game I dislike? Many developers have fallen into the misunderstanding that making a game open world will make it better. But for games with linear stories and progression, an open world serves little purpose and can cause players to feel dissatisfied or irritated by the constant struggle with trying to treat the game as something it, at its core, is not. This is why I hold yet another hot take in that I don't really like Tears of the Kingdom. I'm sorry. Have I 100%ed the game? Okay, well, kinda. I just not the Koroks, cause fuck that. But I did all like the dungeons and shit. I got the furry armor. I fully maxed it out. I got every armor piece in the game. I did all the important quests that I cared about. I put in a lot of hours into that game and had a lot of fun. So why don't I like it? Well, let's start off from the beginning of the game. You start off in a cutscene with Zelda, explore some cave, then lose all of your hearts and stamina and your sword, as it would be difficult to continue from Breath of the Wild. This is just a character reset, as many sequels often do. Just like with Metroid Fusion, how they essentially reset all the power of Samus so that she lost all of her latent abilities. Oh yeah, by the way, that Zelda cutscene introduction thing, that takes like 8 minutes, I'm pretty sure. That is ridiculous. Bro, half of your fan base has fucking ADHD. You can't make the introduction that is unskippable 8 minutes. It's not even a fun tutorial. It's just walking simulator. You go through some corridors to get to the title card, and then you are in the Great Sky Island. GSI is a well-designed tutorial area with an openness on order completion. GSI can take a while to complete, but it's still relatively fun to go through. And then the tutorial section is over, and the clouds clear to show Hyrule below. You jump off into the land below, but then the first issue occurs. Unlike in Breath of the Wild, where the paraglider is given to you upon completion of the tutorial, you don't get it from GSI. Instead, after completing this tutorial section, which has taken by this point probably around 45 minutes to an hour for a casual player, if you want the incredibly desirable item that is the paraglider, you need to go to Lookout Landing. Talk to Pura for a cutscene. Then she tells you to find Captain Hawes. You go to Hyrule Castle on top of one of the battlements. Talk to him to trigger another cutscene and a bunch of unskippable dialogue. Then he tells you to go back to Pura to talk to her. Then you go back to talk to Pura about some insignificant bullshit. Then she tells you to go rest in a bed in the shelter. You go there and sleep. Then you find her at the tower she's working on and talk to her again. Then she asks for your help, so you use the definitely not Sheikah slate to activate the tower, and then she finally gives you the paraglider. And now you can unlock towers. Unless it comes with like a quest to unlock it first, like moving some sticks or killing a weird ass bird for some reason that like stealing the only fucking thing you need to activate the tower. At least now the world's open, right? Wrong. All main quests pass through Pura and Lookout Landing. And if you thought, fuck you, Pura, I'ma just skip the paraglider, congratulations, you have been locked out of 2 separate dungeons, even if you get to them. You can't activate or go through dungeons without doing the lengthy dungeon quests. If you want to go straight to the final boss, you can, but you'll be skipping most of the game. And if you want to go to the dungeons, you need to complete all the quests to get the NPCs you need to beat the dungeons. You can't beat these dungeons without those companions either, as each dungeon has some sort of gimmick that requires them. But Breath of the Wild had dungeon quests too, and the main quests went through Impa, so what's different with Tears of the Kingdom? Okay, I know people who actually make that complaint. That's not how they sound, obviously. Breath of the Wild dungeon quests were short. Impa was not required to experience all the dungeons. Towers and the paraglider were unlocked right from the tutorial section, which was also fun, but significantly shorter. Not a bunch of mandatory and intrusive cutscenes that pulled away from gameplay. Let's look at the Water Temple from Tears of the Kingdom. And I'll probably forget a step or two because of the fucking convoluted nature of it. You find Zora's domain. Clean a statue. Talk to the future queen. She tells you to find her husband, Sidon, on top of the mountain. Sidon tells you to go back to his wife if you didn't get the Zora tunic because you forgot to give her some fucking ancient fish that no longer exists, but it actually does exist, like a lot and everywhere. Then you find some old fucker around some shit lake to talk to and clear some slate of muck and then just kind of jam that shit back in place so that he can read it. You report back to Sidon about it, who tells you to find his dad. If you don't know where the dad is, you eavesdrop on some children talking about it in the throne room. You find the king, who gives you some scales. You swim up to some sky island that looks like a fish, because how else would you know it's Zora themed? You solve the puzzle using one of the scales. Then you go to report back to Sidon. Sidon argues with his wife or whatever because fish marriage is happy marriage. Then you fight a shit mini boss. Literally a shit mini boss. Then Sidon argues with his future wife again because fish marriage is happy marriage. Then you go back to that scale puzzle you solved like 20 minutes ago. Sidon does some weird swimming in circles bullshit so you can drown more effectively. But just kidding, it was a secret underwater cave. You climb through that area to touch some symbol. Climbing through that area is ass because all the walls are wet because it's a wet cave. It's a wet ass cave, a WAC. And congratulations, you have just unlocked the area that leads to the dungeon. No, not the dungeon yet. You have some fucking patience. And you know how you were in an underwater cave underneath a lake? Yeah, it turns out the game says, oh yeah, by the way, fucko, you need to go like 4,000 miles up and take a left. You fly around in the sky, but actually swimming and gliding, I don't know. I kind of just flew all the way up. I kind of cheated that section of the game because it took forever. Fight a mini boss. Cutscene number 5 or 20 or some shit. I don't know. It's just saying how you are now in a dungeon while you are clearly in a dungeon. And voila, water temple. How about Breath of the Wild? Talk to the king, Sidon, and Muzu. Have 20 shock arrows. You can get them wherever, but if you really need them, the Lionel on the mountain guards some. You don't even need to fight the Lionel, honestly. Like it's an optional thing. You don't need that. You use Sidon to disable the divine beast. Have your dead fish girlfriend tell you you're in a dungeon while you are in the dungeon. And voila. Va Elephant. I can't remember the fucking name. What makes it worse is that there is text that pulls up on the screen when you try to break away from the Tears of the Kingdom linear narrative that says, you can't do this yet because we won't allow it. Spirit Temple requires all the other dungeons to be beaten first. Hyrule Castle, as a dungeon, requires a main quest and all of the 4 main dungeons to be complete. Certain bonuses won't trigger without the completion of certain dungeons or main quests, somewhat arbitrarily too. Recall? Technically, you're supposed to beat a bunch of dungeons first to find where it is to get to it, but thank fuck there is no trigger blocking it. You can just go straight for it if you know where it is. Hint hint. Great Plateau, the tutorial section from Breath of the Wild, since they use the same fucking map. Yeah, just go in one of the holes there and kind of just go towards the center, and you'll find it. You'll find it. It's easy. Want the horn statue though? Beat some bosses first, then we'll talk. Yeah, no, I genuinely didn't realize that there was like a trigger for the horn statue to even be a thing. I That pissed me off because I was like, why can't I just like trade in my hearts and stamina essence or whatever, like I could in Breath of the Wild, by just finding the horn statue? You can find the horn statue, you just can't fucking access it until you've beaten a dungeon or two or whatever. Breath of the Wild gave us all the freedoms of the world of Hyrule that we wanted, and it was beautiful and empowering. Tears of the Kingdom took that same world, gave us amazing tools to interact with that world and new worlds with the sky and the depths, and then told us no when we wanted to do the same stuff we did before. Breath of the Wild ruined Tears of the Kingdom for me because of how it handled linearity with its progression. Had I not played Breath of the Wild before playing Tears of the Kingdom, I probably would think that Breath of the Wild was a downgrade or maybe a sequel or something. I don't know. I don't know what I would think. This is a hypothetical. But giving you all those freedoms and then taking them away in the sequel just feels wrong. There are obviously more games out there, including ones relevant to this specific discussion, but these were just examples of this topic I wanted to share from the catalog of games I've played personally. Before you go thinking, I hate these games that I've criticized, understand that criticism is not necessarily hatred. I bought and played all these games and kept playing them, even though some frustration over those moments happened. Linearity is great for story-centric games, but for replayability, open world tends to fare better. A well-made linear game can be replayed with plenty of excitement, even knowing the end from the beginning, and knowledge of the story can even alter how someone plays. Take Tears of the Kingdom, for example. Out of defiance, I played a no lookout landing playthrough of that game, which locked me out of a lot of main quest stuff. But at least the game allowed me to do that, kinda. It was pretty damn tricky. I had to get the entire glide set without a paraglider. And then I had to also save two of the Great Fairies and upgrade the glide set twice so that I could just pretend fall damage didn't exist anymore. Open world does not mesh well with linear narrative, and I think it is important for game developers and storyboarders to understand this while collaborating on a project. Getting it right is a massive feat. I don't want to underplay what developers and storyboarders do for games. There's clearly a lot of work that goes into it, and I've personally never had to do that specific line of work. But when they get those two things right, the story and the gameplay, it is just a masterpiece. So, with that all being said, feel free to share some games this topic reminded you of, or some of your favorite games, or maybe what you thought of the games I criticized or praised. I know a lot of people, for example, love Tears of the Kingdom because they love the sandbox nature of it. In the next video I do of this, I may just go more in depth on one of the games I talked about today, because while replaying some of these games, I was like, holy shit, this is really fun. And I kind of want to just really praise games that do shit really well. Metroid Fusion is definitely one of them. I could talk about that game for hours, even though I could probably talk for it longer than it actually takes me to 100% it. I've 100%ed it, including 100% map, in about 2 hours-ish. Crumble City is dog shit, though. Let me know which one of those games you would like to see a more in-depth take on, because I'll probably just pick one of them and then just make that the next video. But anyways, thanks for tuning in. Wale te miyamiki, and ta-ta for now. And integrate the player into the game world. I'll try that again. I put a weird fucking emphasis on that one word. Because of how it makes them... Wait, what the fuck? Apparently I forgot how to read. Being able to... Talking... Okay, hold on. I was scrolling. Shit. I forgot how to read. To say spiritual successor to King... Ooh, that was hard to pronounce for some reason. I am not versed in Dark Souls. What the fuck? That's not how you pronounce that. Wanna fight Sif and Gartroot? That's not how the fuck you pronounce that. Placed on it. Wait, shit. Fuck. Try that again. And along the way. Wait, shit. I forgot how to read. It's hard to read when you're fucking off your ass, whatever. Normal enemies. What the fuck? That is not how you pronounce that. You have just unlocked that area that leads to the... Fuck. Okay, ta-ta for now, bye.